Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Nicole Sundin. Nicole is the CPO at Axio, which is a leader in cyber risk management software. Nicole has devoted her entire career to building awareness around the benefits of usable security and human-centered security to the broader cybersecurity community as a way to increase company revenue and build a seamless user experience. Nicole, thank you for joining our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So I believe that we will have a thoughtful conversation on the topic of usable security and human-centered security. But before that, Nicole, could you tell us a short story about your career path, what brought you to where you are right now, and what you guys at Axio are up to these days?
Sure. So first of all, once again, thank you for having me. I'm always so excited to talk about the concept of usable security, specifically with other security and risk professionals. A little bit about me. So throughout my educational background, I've always been very interested in human behavior and societal behaviors, focusing on concepts like sociology, African American history, psychology, etc. And so after I graduated from my undergrad, I ended up working, doing social and behavioral research, which led me into thinking about, like, when you write these large reports, does anyone read them, right? Like, what is all this work, hundreds of page report, is anyone reading them? Are they usable? And so then I fell in love with the concept of visualization and dashboarding and interactive infographics and things like that. And that was really my first step into design and usability from the digital perspective. And then from there, I really fell in love with the concept of usability, also just in technology and platforms in general, which is when I pursued my, advanced education in human-centered computing, focusing on the intersection of usable security and visualization. From there, I started working in security companies like Thycotic. Now it's called Delinea after their merger with Centrify, where I built the whole entire UX team, redesigned the platforms with the concept of usable security in mind, meaning creating, password policies, or specifically around privileged accounts, should not inhibit workflow. Right. So on all these different products, not just thinking about, is it easy to implement, which is also part of usable security, but also, is it inhibiting workflow, meaning they won't use it if it is, right? And so really building up this concept of usable security from the ground up at the organization and in the technology. After that exited, I joined Axio as the vice president of design here, which I'm implementing a usable security philosophy now as a CPO in a completely different way for risk professionals, thinking about how do I communicate risk, breaking down the socio-technical gap, right? Making this usable security communication to the organization, right? Communicating risk. So, at the end of the day, security in a lot of ways is a black box to non-technical folks. So whether they're being forced to implement a control in their workflow that they don't like, or they're being told about threats, vulnerabilities, or risks in their environment that they don't understand, there has to be a way for usable security principles to really facilitate a better experience for everyone involved, whether in the conversations or the implementation of the control. So that is about me. And at Axio, what we do is we do cyber risk management, performance, and planning. And so we do things like maturity assessments, compliance assessments in our platform. We also do cyber risk quantification, focusing much more on impact than likelihood. So the dollar amount of a risk in your environment, and then insurance stress testing, and then also these control planning and communication to the rest of the organization and product. So that's what Axio does as well.
Fantastic. So a little bit more about your usable security, because you explained what is it and how you're approaching it. Can you provide maybe some examples of how prioritizing human-centered security can lead to more seamless user experience for customers? And what challenges have you faced when advocating this usable security?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, security in the technology space and all this in the different product spaces, usability has been an afterthought, right? and it has been very engineering driven. So there's a huge deficit in these controls that people are taking to market and the implementation of these controls. Of course, people are buying technology, but when you implement these controls and you put them on your environments, if they're not being utilized effectively, it doesn't matter that you have them, right? So an example of this would be, I'm going to implement just a business user password vault, right? Like get a LastPass and put it onto your environments, right? But if the plugin doesn't work, right? Users aren't going to use it. They're still going to write down their notes, their sticky pads of like my password is password 123 4, or make it your password everything the same, not complicated passwords. And then inherently you bought a control that isn't securing, right? So if you implement usable security principles in that workflow of building a product, they're much more likely to be adopted, right? So that is an example, right? And there's another thing that I often like in regards to usable security, is that when you design for products, and also when you are evaluating, you want to be thinking about two things. There's two personas that are always using a security product: a configuration persona, who is setting it up, who is putting it on the network, who is configuring it, and who is the utilization persona, who is using it. And those two people are not the same often. And so they need to be designed in two separate ways and looked at the workflows in two separate ways. And if you're not looking at those two personas when you're introducing a control, it probably is not going to be adopted as much as you'd like. And if the product team or the design team of the control is not thinking about it, their user base is not going to adopt it as much as they'd like. So that is what usable security is, why it's important. Human-centered design principles, how it's being used effectively in the field. Challenges exist all over the place when implementing usable security, right? Because design is often not elevated at an organization. So an example of this is when I was elevated, at my current job, my last job, we would actually implement these sorts of things outside of product as well. Like how is this workflow working? What is the usable security trade-offs of giving admin credentials to engineers on their computers, right? It makes their lives easier. It also introduced a lot of risks. And so we would talk about other workflows we could introduce on the engineers to implement it. But if you're not elevated at the organization, and if you're not thinking about user experience is bigger than just UI design, these principles are in some ways more theater, right? You're just talking about them. You're not actually implementing them. And so it's in some ways a philosophy that your organization has to adopt.
Fantastic. So let's discuss your role as role model for women in the cybersecurity, because it's not often that we see women in this field. So what advice do you have for women who are looking to pursue a career in the cybersecurity and maybe facing barriers or doubts?
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, everyone faces barriers when they're trying to start a new role, right? Whether it's at a new company or just even a new occupation in general, right? There's no, everyone is facing this. When you're a woman and you look around, there's not a lot of people that look like you, right? It's even difficult. So my suggestion to women who always want to break into security is join LinkedIn groups, network, meet people, other women who do similar roles to what you want to do, because then they can guide you, help you, and in some ways advocate for you to succeed, right? And like having that community and partnership is so beneficial to women who want to join the cybersecurity world.
Fantastic. Could you perhaps share some personal experience or challenges you have encountered as a woman in this traditional male dominated industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone, every woman has experienced something that they define as probably a little strange because they're a woman in a male-dominated field. It's little things though, right? And by the way, it's non-biased, and I've never had super biased that I think they're doing this because I'm a woman. It's non-biased, and I don't want to fault other people. I will say that up front. I don't think it's purposeful, but it's the little things like sometimes people ask me, well, I hope your partner is supportive of your career. Well, I don't think anyone would say that to a man, because it would be assumed that their partner is supportive of their career, right? Or, if I get fired up about something that I really believe in, wow, you're being really emotional right now. I can tell there's a lot of emotions there, right? Like, yeah, I am. I'm being very emotional. And in fact, you were emotional on the last call when we talked about this, and I never said anything about that, right? So it's like these little side comments. Or I walk into a room with people, and there's a bunch of men, right, that I work with, and there's other men there, and we introduce each other and shake everyone's hand, and I'm the last person that they introduce themselves to and shake their hand, right?
Hmm.
And so it's like just the little things. I notice them. It is not purposeful, of course, but they're there, right? And it makes me feel different, right? And I think that's the key. And so, my suggestion always is to call it out, right? A good workplace is a place that is open and honest to communication, and be like, that made me feel uncomfortable, right? Or just, acknowledge it, but don't hold on to it, right? Because often it's not purposeful. It is, right? And so it's something that you have to work through and work towards, and work in some ways confront, right, when it happens. So
Right. So let's discuss a little bit about building diverse teams for human-centered computing, because you're also doing this. So diversity is often considered crucial for innovation. Why is it especially important in this context of human-centered computing and cybersecurity?
it's because we're working with humans, right? And a human is not a 30-year-old white male from San Francisco, right? There's humans come from different backgrounds, different places. And so the basis of human-centered computing is building platforms that work for all humans, right? Inclusivity, empathy towards others, right? And so having people with different perspectives being a part of your team is probably one of the most valuable things you can do. I think a good example of like when human-centered computing is not and diversity is not understood in a process. I love this example, although it's tangible UX, it's not security. So, when you go into the bathroom and there's sensors on the water fountain, right? And you put your hands up and the water comes down. There's often people of color, taller women, shorter men that this wasn't working towards. And so they were evaluating like what happened when we were making these sensors. They only tested against average, right? Whatever they defined as average white males, right? And so, or average white women. And so when you put your hands up and you have a different colored skin, the sensor was having a hard time recognizing that there was a hand there. And that was when I read that article, I was like, wow, this is why human-centered computing exists, why usability experts exist in the field. Because think of, once again, the barrier to like a personal workflow when you can't wash your hands in a bathroom, right? Like you're stood there and kind of like, so I always thought that was really interesting. And I'm very tall, so they often don't work for me. I'm 5'11", which is much taller than most women. And it never works because I'm at the wrong height as I put my hand up. So that's an example. Now in cybersecurity, you see it all the time, especially in global platforms, right? People use the wrong icon. Or when they're doing localization, they might put Arabic in, but it reads the wrong way, right? Because we're Western, right?
Exactly.
And so like when you have people from different perspectives, it's not the customer that has to tell you that, right? Because you would experience that, or you have a different perspective from talking, or from your perspective and your background, that the Arabic reads in a different orientation than Western language. So things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's funny. I recently I saw a funny video. There were two people in the elevator, and there was no button which floor to, because they say you need to just to speak it, and they were Scottish, and they tried to do 11 in Scottish, and the elevator
Yes. Yeah,
didn't
that's
understand.
exactly it, right? Because it was probably only tested against Brits or something, right?
Yeah,
And so, like, then it didn't understand the language, and that's why it is so important. And then if you think it compounds, right? So this whole generative AI phenomenon that's happening, who trained that model, right?
exactly.
And so like thinking about usable privacy and also human-centered computing in regards to AI and the implementation of AI. And if you especially have a diverse team or a diverse workforce, like it often isn't right. It's not correct, right? Because the person that was training it is not diverse enough, right? Or it wasn't a diverse skill set enough in the training model. So yeah.
Fantastic. So I would like to ask you kind of your personal point of view. What is the major misconception in the cybersecurity field that you kind of strongly disagree with?
Major misconceptions just in general.
No, just maybe not in cybersecurity, but in the design of these
Oh,
platforms.
yeah. I actually talked about this last night. So there's this large phenomenon, right, that people are pushing towards, that I want a single pane of glass to look at all of my data. And like at, at high level, that makes a lot of sense, right? So I don't have to like go around to different platforms and different things. But the reality is that people have low visualization literacy, right? So they're having a hard time making comparisons. They also, this data is not in context, right? So you're just, maybe you have like, a metric about your identity, and then it might be right next to your metric around vulnerability, and they're displayed the same way, although should not be compared. They're completely different disciplines, right? And so I really am trying to push the field in regards to design, visualization, and product. The single pane of glass, pulling different data sources together, putting things together, and sometimes does not benefit the user and makes their lives harder, right? And so think of creative ways that you can design and you can lead product organizations that are not on these trends that in some ways are super viral, right? Like there's a lot of talk around it, but it's not good human-centered principles, right?
Mhm, mhm. Are there any emerging trends or development in the field of the system design that you want to share with us? Because it's some
Yeah.
specific topic. We mostly talk about with people on the specific issue on hand, like cybersecurity, but we almost never talk about actually design of the system.
Mm. But what, like something that I really love right now, you know, there is this movement that I'm really enjoying right now around, and it's partly because of where I work in risk, right? Is really aiding the CISO in reporting to non-technical audiences, right? Now, if you've obviously the listeners work in security, so they understand this pain point, but people who don't work in security just are the recipients of this, right? So CISO comes to your executive meeting and they're like, we're red, yellow, green. Well, what does that mean? It means we're fine. It means I need a little bit more money, but like we're good. The risk is fine. But now CISOs are really getting involved and wanting to make more of a business case, communicate that language and breaking down the barriers between the business. Like the security is becoming more of a business function, which I think is so important. And so like the reporting of that, the communication of that, watching, and then obviously then you're having to design products for this new problem set that's coming out. That's like super lightweight, but also says enough, visualization heavy, but not too visualization heavy, speaking to two audiences. It's a very complicated design problem, but I'm seeing a lot of vendors, including ourselves, but other vendors trying to tackle this problem. And I think number one, it solves a deep problem in the field, but also it's an interesting design problem because you're trying to serve two personas at once, which is very complicated. But people are doing a good job, which I think is really interesting.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
So, if we summarize our interview for someone who is listening to it, would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
The first is always when because you're all risk professionals, security professionals that are listening to this, you are evaluating tools. Make sure when you're evaluating tools, you are thinking about the usability of the implementation of these controls. Because if they're not implemented, they're not going to be adopted, and inherently you'll become less secure, more risk. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is if you have product people who are focused on user experience. And if you have user experience designers who are focused deeply on that, elevate their voices, not only in the product world, but in the organizational world as a whole, because they have a good point of view that can help you in implementation, right?
Mhm.
They understand users, they understand how things are getting implemented, and they're busy, but they want to help. So those are my two. And three, hire diverse workforces. It's one of the most important things you can do. So.
All right, fantastic. That's were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot something to ask you something that you feel will benefit our audience, please go ahead.
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much for having me. What a great conversation.
Thank you, Nicole. And probably it's good to kind of work with you guys and maybe in 2 months or 3 months to discuss another topic with other guys, because you kind of a large company, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely bring some people over from Axio, talk about risk modeling, assessments, which, different standards, compliance standards that are being brought into the EU, like, whatever you guys want. We have subject matter expertise around all risk. So
Fantastic. Thank you again.